Hello and welcome to the Season 1 finale of Build Mode. I'm your host, Isabelle Johannessen, and over the past few months, we've been diving deep into all aspects of go-to-market. And there could definitely be an entire podcast dedicated to just this topic, but hopefully you feel like you have a few more tools in your belt when it comes to helping you find your audience, selecting the best strategic partners, and getting your product out there. To bring it all home, I'm talking with the partner and COO of the GTMfund, Paul Irving. It only seemed fitting to end our GTM season with the GTM experts. This was a really great conversation, and Paul offered some excellent advice. So let's get into it. Hi, Paul. How's it going? Thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here. Honored to be part of Season 1 of Build Mode.
Yeah, I mean, it couldn't be more fitting to have the GTM fund on our Season 1 finale, all about go-to-market. Obviously it wasn't just the name of your fund that got our attention initially, but you guys have a really interesting thesis that I think will be valuable for our founders to hear about. So I wonder if you can start by just introducing yourself and what the GTM fund does.
Yeah, you bet. So my name is Paul Irving, partner and COO at GTMfund. GTMfund is an early stage venture capital fund, but the unique part of it for us is we're backed by 300 plus operators from the fastest growing companies on the planet. So these are revenue operators, CROs, CMOs, VPs of growth, customer success, RevOps from companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Rippling, Apollo, Datadog, Samsara, Procore, so on and so forth. And we're here to invest in the most ambitious pre-seed and seed founders in B2B AI and software, and hopefully help them build world-class revenue engines by connecting them to all these different operators that we're lucky to have as part of the fund, and really get specific about the people we introduce them to. So people who know your customers and know your go-to-market motion and have sort of been there, done that in the strategy that you're looking to execute.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, what do they say? Your most important book is your contact book. That's probably not the right saying, but it sounds like your network and the operators that you work with are a really, really strong value add to your portcos. And from what I understand, the whole thesis of the firm is really built around this somewhat provocative idea that distribution is the final remaining moat. Basically, that AI has eroded all technical moats and it's easier than ever to build a company, but now it's actually harder than ever to get the product through the noise and into customers' hands. So I would love to hear you just sort of elaborate on how you see the competitive landscape changing in this AI era.
Yeah, 100%. It's been nice that we have been seeming less and less crazy saying that out loud over the years. It seems like some people are joining the crowd or the noise behind us with a similar refrain. And it really just comes down to, and it's not hard to see into the future, but it's been the case for years now, is there are incredible tools out there to help people build and ship products faster than ever, enterprise-ready products faster than ever. And if that's the case, the innovation cycles for startups are happening in faster and faster incremental cycles than they ever have before. So in a world where a 3-year head start in a category could give you a considerable lead for a long time, we're starting to see that tighten into a cycle where even a 3-month head start doesn't always give you the room to breathe that you were thinking it did historically. And so where teams are winning and we're seeing the most successful companies establish themselves is with better distribution and go to market. That looks different for every company, and I think this is another thesis for us that we've tried to hammer home as much as we can and as often as we can. And it's part of the reason why we built a broad network to be able to work with the startups that we're lucky to partner with, is that every company is unique because your end customers for every company are unique, and you should be building, especially in the early days, a go-to-market motion that's not just suited for the market that you're tackling, but the very specific customers and buyers and decision makers on the other side. And what we're seeing is, especially in the early days, the best companies find 1 or 2 channels where they believe they have a competitive edge to win and their customers are showing up, and they juice those for sort of every bit of value they can. And we're seeing people compound some really interesting returns by doing that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that because on this season of Build Mode, we've talked to many different types of companies about their challenges and their successes in going to market. So we've talked to health tech founders that had, big regulatory hurdles to overcome. We've talked to consumer tech founders that have really, really niche audiences or maybe a paid ads business model that's challenging. But in B2B SaaS, I imagine that, of course, enterprise sales are long and painful, but what do you guys look for when you are evaluating a potential investment that gives you that conviction that this company has the potential? I mean, because you know what hurdles they'll face in the market, right? So what do you see? What spark are you looking for?
What's interesting about that is, and I guess this is the part that hasn't changed a ton. I think we're seeing companies grow faster than ever. We're seeing companies generate revenue earlier in their company life cycle than ever before. And there's a variety of benchmarks coming out that can validate this, but we see it, qualitatively in the founders that we're lucky to talk to about it. But you're looking for the same things. I think it's just the speed in which they are showing up has been incredibly compelling and maybe faster than ever before. But you're looking for customers that have a burning need in a hair on fire problem, who are pulling you and your product roadmap forward. So they're not just wanting to buy what you have today, but they're giving you feedback and insights into where they're looking to go and how you can help them get there. We're seeing renewal cycles that are faster than anything we've seen before, which is also really interesting, especially because getting in the door in enterprise sales, even though in certain categories, because of some of them pseudo experimental AI budgets, but a willingness to buy and buy faster than maybe we've seen in historical cycles. It's still difficult. You still have to go through procurement. If you're a health tech company, there's still regulatory hurdles that you have to get around or go through as part of your buying and customer buying process. But we're seeing upsells and expansions really quickly. And so that's one of the early indicators you see is maybe there's only, two or three customers, but the customers are clamoring for the product and they're clamoring to expand it either across their organization, deeper into their workflows. And you can really start to see the ROI that the company was promising start to compound for their customers on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think once that starts to happen, you can successfully say you've made it. You found product market fit, and it's going to be hopefully a smoother sailing from there. But even getting to that point, right, is this major challenge that we're trying to help founders tackle. And I want to talk a little bit about the operators that you work with, the LPs, right? So out of hundreds, more than 350, what is your process for selecting which operators should be matched with a particular startup for a particular challenge at that time? How do you sort of operationalize this matching process?
Equal parts art and science, which we're trying to make more science over the years of doing this. But in the early days, it actually looked different than it does now. I mean, AI has changed the way we run our firm, in addition to, of course, of how all of our companies and founders run their companies. But in the early days, and we still use parts of this, it was Typeform, Zapier, Airtable, and we have Enterprise Slack for sort of our day-to-day community. But what that would look like is for operators that come on board, to be part of GTMfund, they would fill out a preference card for us, let us know where they can help, what their areas of expertise are, different stages that they've, worked in and been successful before. We've had a bunch of automations on the back end populate into an Airtable, and then it would be something that our team could query. So, if you're a founder that's looking for enterprise sales support in healthcare, we're able to look into that Airtable, find the right person, reach out and make those connections. What's changed for us is we built our own internal AI tool. We call it XVal, short for exponential value, which is not a very modest name for it. But hey, we're not here to be modest, I guess, with our branding at GTM Fund. But it basically takes all of that same data. So all the typeform entries, all the internal Slack conversations. We have a podcast and a newsletter ourselves, the GTM Now podcast and GTM Now newsletter. It takes all of that content from over the years, all of our operators, operating experience, what companies they work for, when, what stages. And it just turns into a queryable interface where anyone from our team could go in and say, hey, what are growth best practices for a seed stage PLG company? And it can serve up, here are the operators that we have in our network that would be great for that person to chat to. Here's a bunch of content or newsletters that they should be taking out. Here's 2 podcasts and the right clips to check out from those podcasts. And here's a bunch of Slack conversations that we've had over the years that are helpful nuggets. And you end up with this dossier that you can share, with the people that we're working with on, hey, here's some people to talk to, but here's some content that you can chew on in the meantime. And it's just the specificity of it at the end of the day. You could have the best enterprise seller in the world, and if I'm building a PLG design tool, they're not going to be a helpful person for me to chat with when I'm building my, early growth or early sales motion. And so the way we've done it has evolved a little bit and is still going to evolve. It's become more AI native over the years, but some of the same principles still apply.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like a pretty well-oiled machine, and I'm glad to hear it's evolving internally as well. My former life before joining TechCrunch, I had a similar role that I was matchmaking startups with various mentors from around the world. So I completely empathize with how difficult that can be. I think the biggest challenge that I remember facing was that oftentimes some of the founders in the early stage startups don't quite know what the problem is, right? And can't even ask the question, like, this is what I need help with clearly. And it was really up to us as sort of VCs and, the backgrounds that we have to dig deeper and help them identify what kind of resources they needed, what kind of mentorship. And they might think, oh, we need to do paid ads. We need a salesperson. It's like, no, no, you're jumping way too far ahead. What you need is XYZ, right? And so I'm curious how you sort of work one on one with these companies and help them find their path.
Yeah, Isabel, it's such a good call out because we've been noticing. I think that's a lot of what our role is, and this is a trend I think we've been noticing across early stage go to market generally, and it ties in really nicely. Is I think for a long period of time, B2B SaaS had a spreadsheet and playbook mentality where you hire two SDRs and two AEs, and you hire them at this stage at this revenue range, and then you hire a VP of sales at this stage in this revenue range, and then you raise your Series A, and then you hire a demand gen manager and a VP. There was this playbook, and then the people who would come in would have the spreadsheets and numbers to back it up. And even though that wasn't successful for every single company, I think that playbook worked really well over the years. And what's changed and is becoming really compelling is I think the aperture for how you run your go to market motion has never been more broad. And we've never had more tools to do really specific, granular, and unique things when it comes to go to market. But what that means on the other side is the type of decisions you make, like what order you hire people, or do I bring on an advisor to help with this or that, or what's really the root of the problem that I'm looking to solve, becomes a really important exercise. And so I think that's what our job is you still have people say, hey, we need more pipeline. I need to hire two SDRs. Do you have an SDR onboarding playbook, or can you review these, job descriptions? And then I think we have to go back to the first principles part and say, okay, you know, why don't we have more pipeline? What are we doing now that isn't working? Where are our customers? Is SDRs even the right hire that we should be making? And so you're absolutely right. I think that discovery process is what, if you're a founder, your investors, advisors, other founders in your network, I mean, that there's such great sounding boards to have those conversations, and that's what we try to do. But what's fascinating about today is I think the aperture of how you build your go-to-market or revenue engine and the decisions you make to get there have never had more, unique and specific pathways depending on your company.
Yeah, I love that you keep using the word unique because I think the the name of the game now is to think outside the box, which is cliche, right? But it's true. I mean, even from the founders we've been talking to recently, it's founders that are getting creative and getting their hands dirty with different strategies that maybe we haven't seen before and really sort of almost disrupting go to market, if you know what I mean. And I'm curious if you've had any companies that you work with or that you've heard of that have done something really creative in order to get their product to market.
Yeah, 100%. And this is the part where I could keep you on for hours. So hopefully,
Please.
we're not going to go into too many, but I have a few that come to mind that I find are really fascinating. And I'll give a shout out to Jordan Crawford, who's one of our operators, who's done work with a bunch of our portfolio companies on exactly this. But he came on the GTM Now podcast and outlined an example, which I think is really illustrative of the specificity of data that you can pull into your customer outreach and your go-to-market playbooks is like nothing we've seen before. And the example he used, and we work with a lot of vertical AI and vertical software companies, so it's pretty applicable. But let's say you're selling software to roofers. And instead of emailing a roofing company and saying, hey, we help roofing companies grow revenue, and you send them a typical email of ROI and what that looks like, you can send them something like this. You can say, hey, there's a house a mile from you that just sold. And in the listing description, the seller included a $10,000 credit for a new roof. Here's the name and the email of the realtor on that property for the deal. And now you're not pitching your software in the email, you're not pitching your product, but that is an email that people would not just open and respond to, but they would pay to open and respond to. And you're giving them a warm lead. It's a ready to close opportunity. And you wouldn't have been able to pull that data properly to be able to do something like that historically, but you can do that now. It's reasonably scalable because the signal is public. This is a real estate listing. The problem is time bound. The home just sold, so it's a warm lead of today. The budget already exists. There's a credit to pay for the new roof to be new roof to be replaced or a roof to be repaired, and you can do it locally as well. So I'm sending the email to a roofing company in Cincinnati, Ohio. I can do the data pull from real estate listings recently close to those neighborhoods that the roofing company works in Cincinnati, Ohio. It works for vertical companies because I think you can get way more granular into the very unique, industries and verticals that you're selling into from a customer perspective. But it works horizontally too. You just have to be very clear about defining, okay, who is our buyer? What do they care most about? What signals should we care most about? And as long as you have a really good sense and concrete understanding of what those things are, the data that you can pull and the way you can layer on AI to pull that data is way deeper than we've ever, historically been able to do and go to market.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the data play is a really strong competitive advantage that we're seeing play out, right? Because not only do you have to be able to capture that data and also then be able to utilize it and create meaningful value with it. And I think that's where a lot of companies might have one of those aspects but are struggling to kind of get the whole chain together. But so of course that's, the data play, but then the other value obviously of introducing all of these companies to your network of LPs and operators is the introductions that they can then make, right? And introductions within specific industries. And because they have been key players themselves in many of these industries, et cetera. So I'm curious sort of how you see the chain of introductions when it comes from your port codes to the first introduction and if you track that or if you have any metrics for that.
We do track that. And Isabel, as someone who's been in this role before, if you found an even better way to track the sort of domino introductions that end up happening, I would love to hear it. It's a difficult to solve data problem, but you end up hearing about it at the other end. We make an introduction for a company to an executive. They end up opening three more doors. Those people end up becoming either a customer or maybe it's an executive hire that a company makes. And it's really, I think what's wonderful about the venture-backed ecosystem more generally is people's willingness to help. They know how hard it is to build a company. They know how, low the likelihood of success is in the grand scheme of things, but people are always willing. If you come and you're curious, you teach them something as part of that as well. People are usually willing to open up doors. So we just shared the end of year statistics for it. We're at thousands of introductions and we categorize them into different things. Some of them are sales intros and partner intros. Some of them are go to market intros. Some of them are candidate intros for people who are looking to hire. Obviously, your typical fundraising intros. We sort of track all of those individually. But the difficult thing is, what the knock on effect of one door that you opened that ends up turning into something really unique down the line. And so we always end up finding the end state when it comes back around and we get an update, but there's probably many steps in between then that are pretty hard to track and we don't always get visibility into.
We actually talked with another VC this season, Leslie from Graham and Walker, and she was mentioning that, before it used to be more of an open playing field where a founder could do a cold reach out to a VC and maybe get a response. But now with AI, you really do need that warm intro. There is so much noise, and this goes for customers or targeting VCs, whoever it is you're trying to reach.
It's not that we get 1,000 crappy cold inbounds. It's that we get 1,000 perfect ones.
I'm curious if you have a story or an example of one particular connection or introduction that you guys made that really, really changed their trajectory.
Yeah, I think one that was, a really fun success story on both sides of the house where, we've been very lucky to work with a company, owner.com, incredible team and company selling software to restaurants to own their entire digital presence and experience across the board. And when we were originally partnering with Adam, he said, "Hey, I want to bring on a go-to-market advisor and specifically somebody who knows high velocity SMB sales." One of the people was Kyle Norton, who was the head of SMB sales for North America at Shopify. And we introduced Adam and Kyle just for an advisor opportunity in the near term. And Kyle was actually on paternity leave at the time. And I remember getting on a Zoom call with him with his sleeping baby in his arms. And he said, "You guys, my wife is going to kill me. I can't leave, a great job at Shopify for a Series A startup while I'm in the middle of my first paternity leave." But they, just from a revenue leader and founder fit, was perfect. And Kyle joined as the SVP of sales, as the CRO there, has been there for, I think north of 3 years now. And the company has been off to the races ever since. And so just the pairing of, hey, who are the perfect people for my business and making those introductions, I think that's one of our favorite stories that always comes to mind.
And it's true that, I mean, one introduction leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. But once you finally meet the right person, the stars align, it can be game changing. We'll be right back after a quick break. But now you have a very unique and interesting vantage point at the GTM fund where you get to see, I'm sure, thousands of companies every year just as a pitch deck, but working closely with 120 plus portfolio companies. So, what do you see as some of the common patterns that companies either nail in their go to market versus the ones that are struggling a bit?
It's a great question, and especially in the early stage lens, we're true believers that you should have 1 to 2 channels at the most in the early days, and you can't spread yourself too thin. You don't wanna, buy a bunch of tools and bring on team members to run a bunch of go-to-market strategies. You wanna iterate and test and innovate, obviously, but I think when it comes down to it, you need to pick 1 or 2 channels that are unique to your company, to where your customers are showing up, and really nail those. And as you grow, go on to Series A, Series B, you're going to diversify your go to market strategy. You're going to bring on new channels and you're going to bring on people to run those. But one of the most common mistakes we find is, young companies trying to do everything at once and realizing you just don't have the capacity to execute at the highest level, 3 or 4 or 5 different channels. You have to pick your 1 or 2. You have to bring on tools and support, whether it's advisors or it's team members, to be able to execute those at a high level. And I think what's interesting about it is there's room to be really creative. And I can give 1 or 2 examples. Yeah, one of them is a vertical software company that found that a ton of their customers are in Facebook groups. Now, Facebook groups don't seem like an incredibly scalable early go-to-market motion, but they can be. And so what they did is they started a few of their own Facebook groups, and they also went into the most popular ones, and they started just posting memes, which again is not putting, their software or product first, but they ended up getting a lot of people connecting with them, following them, joining their Facebook groups, and it became this organic channel where you now had thousands of potential customers, which if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, it's not the sheer number, like 2,000 is, you can get to Series B on that alone. But if you think about it in the framework of, okay, it's 1,000 people, but 700 of them are my actual ICP and buyer because of the specific groups that either we started as a company or the ones that, we've become the most active posters in. It can become a really unique channel if, you're looking to bring on 40, 50, 60 new customers in a given year. That you can run that on your go-to-market motion alone. We saw another company that was selling to HVAC bring on podcast host as an advisor. And, it's advisor agreements take a bunch of different shapes and forms, and so there is a cost to it. But I think in relation to the value you get on the other side, it can be really worthwhile for this individual who doesn't have a lot of the podcast host, who doesn't have unlimited advisor opportunities to choose from, and is so quite incentivized to help your company win. And you have this channel that you've tapped into where you have, thousands and thousands of people who are dedicated HVAC business owners that's your exact ICP that now get to hear about your company, in every other podcast or every couple podcasts, or it gets, brought in organically into the conversation. And so that's when we say, the early stage companies that are very successful, it's not just, oh, you chose LinkedIn or you chose email and you're great. Like those are great, but I think the best companies find things that are really specific. They don't, spread themselves too thin, and they really nail a couple of compelling channels in the early days where they can win and their customers are showing up.
Are you telling me there's an HVAC podcast specifically
There's
about
more than one.
HVACs? What?
There's more
Okay.
than one. You
Wow.
would be surprised.
The podcast world never ceases to surprise me. So, but you guys have some very successful portfolio companies from the likes of Ryder, AI-powered enterprise platform valued at 1.9 billion, I believe, and Vanta, security compliance company valued at about 2.45 billion. So, what are some of the critical success factors from successful companies like this, and how did GTM Fund specifically help them achieve that level of success?
I would be remiss if I took too much credit for, May at Ryder and Christina at Vanta's incredible success, even though we've been very lucky to work with them for years now, because I think incredible companies have a bunch of, very unique and special layers to them. We were very lucky to work with both teams, I think from, the earliest days of GTM Fund, which is fantastic, but I think both have different journeys. For Ryder specifically, we were lucky to be able to place, I think, 4 or 5 pretty key pivotal hires in the early go-to-market team. So John Henwood, an LP of ours, became the VP of customer success there, helped place first two, I believe, of their enterprise reps. One of them who stayed, I think, until very, very recently is one of their top performing reps for years. And then the customer introduction side of things. So in the early days, I mean, and May and the team at Ryder now sell to the largest companies in the world, full stack enterprise, secure AI solution to a variety of different stakeholders, but they were talking to a lot to CMOs at the time. And so for us, we've got a great network of CMOs and we can make introductions to, enterprise companies where we know marketing leaders there and make a warm handoff to May. And I mean, if you ever get a chance to meet her or have her on the podcast, she is a force of nature and a pretty special presence. So she always did a great job closing those. And the Vanta team, we were very lucky, same sort of thing. We're introducing lots of different candidates as the go-to-market team was building and scaling. A unique one for us, which we were grateful for on a variety of different or a number of different layers was the Vanta team actually acquired one of our other seed stage companies, TrustPage, which we worked with from the earliest days. And the TrustPage team is still there, Chase and the team. And we made the connection between, Christina and Chase back in the early days for a partnership conversation. And they hit it off and have been lucky to build some really cool and compelling products together since Christina and the team brought the TrustPage team on board.
We've actually seen a few of those similar situations where one of our battlefield portfolio companies will acquire another, and it's so fun to see sort of your babies going out into the world and partnering together and finding success together. So let's see. I think I have a few sort of rapid fire advice for founders questions for you to wrap up, if that sounds good.
Fire away.
What are some red flags you would look for that might signal that a company may not have the chops to win in this distribution moat that they need to build in order to succeed these days?
I think the one for us that stands out, I'll mention two, but the top one is in a competitive market, having a non-differentiated go-to-market motion in the early days is always difficult because you're often going to go up against either incredibly well-funded incumbents or soon to be very well-funded competitors. And just using the old playbooks, tried and true, same channels that everybody else is tackling, and not having anything that's unique to your company and where you believe you can win, I think is usually a red flag. And sometimes for founders, it's, a great LinkedIn presence and thought leadership. Sometimes it's a newsletter that they built up and as sort of an internal earned and built distribution channel that they can tap into. But we looked for, I would say earned secrets and why a team founded a company and why they're going to win. And then the other one is I think contracts is a very interesting area these days where there's a lot of 3-month easy opt out trial contracts that are getting booked and treated from a company perspective as, earned and booked ARR. And I think there's no problem if enterprises, do want to have a trial period as part of, their buying cycle that can happen in a variety of different corners of software in the industry. But you want teams to understand that and understand the levers of that and understand how to renew and expand those contracts when the trial period comes to an end and have a strategy to manage those.
And speaking of some of these competitors that might have more capital, as you were mentioning, so what advice would you give to a founder who has extremely limited resources and can only focus on maybe 2 go-to-market initiatives? What should those be?
It will go back to something that I mentioned a little bit earlier, but I do believe it's an AI native specificity of data and execution that you can do. And it's narrowing down your ICP. So something that you can do now that was really hard to do historically. And I'll give another shout out to Jordan because he just did a launch, Jordan Crawford digital launch, where he's building agents in Claude Code that build Clayagents for your Clay tables, which is a few different layers of AI native go to market. But what it does is instead of having a ICP that's very deterministic where you say, greater than 500 employees, launched an AI product in the US and the EU, has usage-based pricing, you can get really specific with, recently launched within the last couple of months, an AI product, like has a pricing and packaging page that doesn't line up with best practices for pricing, which is if you're talking about your team internally, those are the contextual, non-deterministic ways you talk about your ICP, but they're really hard to program into a go-to-market motion. And I think there's more options than ever to really explore your ICP, become very AI native and data forward with the way that you approach it and come up with, start spearfishing for the right customers because you can't, you don't have the resources to throw, hundreds of thousands of dollars into paid ads, different channels, 1,000 different tools. But if you focus on the data, you focus on your ICP, and you build an AI native go-to-market engine, I think there's a lot you can get out of that for a pretty limited capital investment at the outset.
Yeah, gotta get that bang for their buck. Another way that founders could do this that, shouldn't require too much money, but is really talking about the networks and the introductions that you guys make, right, through the GTM fund. So again, for founders who don't necessarily have access to 350 of the world's top operational experts, how do you suggest that founders go about building relationships with some of these operators who can advise them and be mentors for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've realized now, Isabel, I'm doing a terrible job at rapid fire. I'm giving you longer answers on everything you ask, but you're asking great questions. I can't help myself. The best way I think is to come at it with a really genuine and curious and personalized approach to every individual that you're looking to get feedback from. Maybe have a door open up. I think where some founders can trip up is you try to sell too quickly on somebody to become a customer, or somebody to become an advisor, or somebody to make an intro for you. And, time is limited, resources are limited, and it's hard enough to win. So you do have to, put those asks in eventually. But I think the people who do a great job building network come at it from a really genuine, open, curious, and personalized approach where, you're trying to find warm intro mapping is great. So you might not have the network yet, but maybe another founder that you met at an event, or another founder that a friend knows through their own network could maybe introduce you to a person, and approaching that conversation, not to maybe sell that person right away, but get their feedback, be really open and honest about where you are as a business, get them excited, and you'd be amazed. I think the altruistic nature of most of the startup ecosystem is one of my favorite attributes of it, where people, if you are, genuine, open, interested, excited, are usually willing to open up doors for you. But I think the people that are great at that approach it genuinely, and try to personalize each introduction and conversation they have.
I could not agree more with you, Paul, and I love that you said that because I think that is honestly one of the best parts about working in the startup ecosystem and just being involved is how willing people are to help, and the concept of warm intro mapping in itself, right? I think a lot of people come to, VCs in media and say, I want an introduction to this big bad VC or this, CEO of this major enterprise. And it's like, I don't know that person, and maybe even if I did, they're someone that's high up in my network that I hardly know, but, I can introduce you to my friend who knows this person better, and it's this game of, small incremental introductions that will eventually, hopefully, get you to where you need to be, but instead of, I think a lot of founders come to Silicon Valley especially with expectations, right? And they want to meet this person, but there are so many people along the way who want to help and who are there to support you, so I think, that's a really great takeaway to sort of wrap up here with, but my last question for you, and this is a bit of a teaser for our season 2 of Build Mode, but what is sort of I know we talked about this a bit earlier too, but sort of your framework for when founders should start hiring a go-to-market team and go-to-market roles, salespeople, marketing team? At what point do you think it's not enough to just have introductions and have your data in place, or you really need to start scaling this?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. And the way we frame it with all the founders that we work with is, what's the current bottleneck, or what's the assumed bottleneck that's right around the corner, and who do we need to hire to unlock that bottleneck? Because this goes back to the idea, which I think was quite pervasive across B2B software for a while, was the playbook oriented nature of it. So yeah, at this stage, you make this hire, and at this revenue, you always hire your SDRs and AEs first, or whatever it may be. And every company is unique. And again, the aperture for how you execute go to market and how you build your business has never been broader. You can do lean startup, you can hyperscale and raise a lot of capital quickly. There's a million different versions of that in between. And so we always look at it through the lens of, okay, what's the bottleneck today? What's the bottleneck that's coming in the future? And who do we need to hire in order to unlock that? And that might be not an SDRAE. It might be a CSM, because customer onboarding is actually the bottleneck at the moment, or implementation. It might be a forward deployed engineer, which is something that we're hearing more and more of. We're seeing lots more demand for early startup employees with consulting backgrounds. So folks, just because deployment, especially in enterprise AI, has tended to be really consultative these days because there's a lot of learning and education and systems integration that you have to do. And so I'm always wary to say like at this stage, hire this person, but I would always try to look at it through the lens of what's the bottleneck in my business today and who is the actual hire I can make to unlock that. And then what's the bottleneck that we can see happening tomorrow and the day after that, and who are the people that we need to hire to unlock it. And the order in which you bring those people on and at what time might look completely different from another founder in your network or another founder that you're talking to.
It sounds like we're throwing away these playbooks. We're just full steam ahead, thinking outside the box this year. I love that.
I guess I know what I didn't come in expecting to set fire to all the old playbooks, but I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of the conversations we're having with teams. So I wouldn't be surprised if that continues on this year.
All right, Paul, thank you so much for joining us for the season 1 finale episode. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and thank you for all of your great insights.
Thanks, Isabelle. Appreciate it.
And that's a wrap on season 1 of Build Mode. We're working on season 2 behind the scenes already as we speak, and you can expect to see that in your feeds come mid-February. And because you've made it all the way to the end of this episode, we'll let you in on a little secret. For season 2, we're focusing on building your team, and we have some really heavy hitter guests coming up. But we still want to hear from you, so if you have anything that you'd like us to talk about or a story that you think is fitting for the podcast, reach out to us at buildmode@techcrunch.com. See you next month, builders. Build Mode is a TechCrunch podcast. Each episode is produced and edited by Maggie Nye and hosted by me, Isabelle Johannessen. Our art and design is also by Maggie Nye. A big thanks to Morgan Little, who leads our audience development, the Foundry and Cheddar video teams, and most of all to you, the builders, and everyone else in the wider startup community. We'll see you back here next time.